I want to suggest this and I want to tell this to us that, hey, serving one another, being kind to one another is our expression, is a deeply spiritual expression of our love towards God. Because how can we love God that we have not seen when we cannot love our brothers and sisters whom we are able to observe around us all the time? The second thing about Abraham as a father of our faith that we can glean from is the fact that Abraham gave priority to people. Genesis chapter 18 is a very interesting account in the life of Abraham, and there is something here that oftentimes we read in Genesis 18 that we overlook. So I want to encourage you, go back and read this for yourself so that you know that I'm not cooking this up, okay? But I want to give you a little bit of a quick background to this, okay? Because in Genesis 18, Abraham is in a place called Mamre. And he was in his tent. And the Bible tells us this, that God appears to him. Now, we don't know how long this was, but Abraham was having a face-to-face encounter with God. God came to him. God was encountering him. But in the midst of the encounter, the Bible tells us this, that he sees three men coming towards him, strangers, people he did not recognize. The narrative in the scriptures gives us no indication that Abraham at this point knew that these three men were not ordinary men. It was only later on in the chapter that we realize that one of these three men is the Lord himself, and while the other are two angelic beings. But at this point, Abraham doesn't know that. Instead, what he does is that in the midst of the face-to-face encounter with God, he leaves the encounter and he rushes out of his tent and he goes to these three men in order to show hospitality to them. Because they lived in the wilderness, in the desert places, the expression of hospitality involves offering them water, washing their feet, refreshing them, and then proceeding to give them an elaborate meal. Now, it might escape us, but let me tell you, in the days of Abraham, there is no microwave. There's no TV lunches or dinners that they just pop in the oven and then it's done. But it literally took hours in order to express that hospitality to these strangers. Now, it was only after the hospitality was extended, then the Lord finally spoke and gave Abraham and Sarah the message that they will have a promised son. Now, there's something important we need to observe here, and that is the fact that Abraham understood that taking care of people is as spiritual as having an encounter with God. This is my point. He interrupted his encounter with God in his tent in order to serve the physical needs of the people around. Again, I don't want us to misunderstand what I'm saying. Okay, I'm not saying that serving people is more important than us spending time with God. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we should exhaust ourselves serving people and then forget about our own personal walk with God. That's not how we're supposed to go about it. In fact, in the book of Acts, we are told this, that the apostles realized they were spending too much time serving people, so they raised up deacons to serve people so that they can dedicate themselves to word and to prayer. Likewise, when, Martha was over-serving, the Lord began to rebuke Martha and said, hey, you need to understand what is the more important thing, and Mary has chosen that, which is to sit at the feet of Jesus. So I don't want us to misunderstand that. But what I want us to understand is that Abraham clearly understood the need to be hospitable and to be generous. And in this context, he was expressing these qualities to these strangers. Now, what happened is this, that an encounter with God became a ministry to men, and in the end, that ministry to men blended back into an encounter with God. Now, this is how Abraham did life. And it would be so wonderful if we can catch a glimpse of how life is to be done. His ministry to God and his ministry to men weave seamlessly into each other. You see, there is one thing, my brothers and my sisters, that we need to realize, is that of all things that are created, there is only one being created in the image of God. And that is the one sitting beside you, in front of you, behind you. We are the only beings created to give a physical expression of who the Lord is. Amen. And when you realize that we are all created in the image of God, then how we treat one another is the closest physical expression of how we treat God. Matthew 25 verse 40 says this, inasmuch as you did this to one of the least of these, my brethren, you did it to me. And Jesus was talking about visiting prisoners, refreshing the weary, going to those who are sick. When we do these things to people, it is as good as us doing to the Lord. I want to suggest this and I want to tell this to us that, hey, serving one another, being kind to one another is our expression, is a deeply spiritual expression of our love towards God. Because how can we love God that we have not seen when we cannot love our brothers and sisters whom we are able to observe around us all the time? All too often, we walk around with our eyes closed because we're so familiar. How many of you know the name of the people that clean your offices every week? How many of you know the names of the one who is standing guard at the gate when you send your kids to school? How many of you know the one who's serving breakfast somewhere in the mornings that you go by every day and you purchase food from them? How many of you know them, or are they just a passing feature that you have not even noticed? You see, that's what God is calling us to. God is calling us to open our eyes. And that's also a principal reason why God chose Abraham. Can you see this? It is not about the gifts of Abraham. It's not about the talent of Abraham. It's about this sense of passion and pursuing passion. And not only that, his eyes to look at the people that are around him, understanding that in seeing the people, he's seeing God.